Good morning, everyone. Thank you for jumping in. We are starting off. I'm just letting everyone in. Thank you all so much for waiting. We started right on time this morning. Welcome to our Earlypay Partnership Series. And today we're actually speaking with Jack Bookham from Manheim. He's a senior valuer there, and we certainly know that we've been chatting a lot about invoice. We've been talking a lot about supply chain issues and, different types of assets and prices and secondhand. And, with Earlypay starting their re-entry into the equipment and asset finance market, it's really important for us to make sure that we highlight things that are going on in the industry right now. So, Jack, without further ado, we seem to have quite a few numbers in already, so we might get started. Welcome to the Partnership Series.
Thanks, Dee. You can see me now, hear me now.
Definitely see you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
We're going to get into some pretty nitty-gritty questions, and we're going to ask some interesting things, and certainly what other people in the industry, what we're all talking about, when we're at functions together, especially around supply chain, quarantine, government regs, and so I'm really interested to get your thoughts today. This is going to be all about you, Jack, and not about us. But look, just quickly before we start, for those who may not have worked with Manheim in the past or are unaware of what you guys do, just give us that quick 60-second elevator pitch on Manheim and what they actually do.
Yeah, so Manheim, we're a remarketer of assets, and it varies from cars, trucks, machinery, all types of plant and equipment. We do manufacturing. We work with financiers, insolvency. We do with corporates. Any idle assets that are sat there or any assets that need to be liquidated. We work for companies to do that, and we've got a national footprint. We're a global company, billion-dollar parent organization. The industrial businesses in Australia and New Zealand, and we cover those markets all the way from Queensland, Melbourne, Adelaide, up north, Darwin, Auckland. So yeah, pretty widespread industrial and car auctioneer.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And I think most of the people in the asset EF space will know who you are, but certainly with the partnership series, we often have clients that join us for these as well. So it's really important for them to know who you are as well. All right, let's get into it. So first question, a lot of the chat in the market at the moment is that some prices are starting to cool around equipment. Tell us a little bit about what you know around that.
So I think, as everyone knows, COVID was a very buoyant time for all asset classes. We were kind of running off this boom. Everything was just skyrocketing. We saw coal hit all-time highs of over $400 a ton, and iron ore exceeding expectations, and that just created this influx of asset prices exceeding any expectation. And of course, all problems with COVID. It was sitting like that for about 2 to 3 years. We're now beginning to see that come off, and it varies with some of the asset classes. We see a real softening in older stock relating to civil and construction equipment. Agricultural equipment still booming, although I'd say prices are where they should be, but there's so many sales happening, from harvesters to sprayers to tractors. Transport is still, sales are up. It's just that construction space is probably what we're beginning to see soften more so than anything else, really.
And do you think that's, possibly a reflection on what we've seen in the market with construction companies? We're probably at 8 or 9, this year that, unfortunately have folded and gone under. Do you think that is a reflection on what you're seeing in sort of construction equipment pricing?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think, we see a lot of, particularly in the insolvency markets, where it's been very quiet for the past couple of years. There hasn't been a lot of insolvent activity. The ATO are beginning to really cramp down on, the money owed to them now, and we usually see that in the construction space first. But in saying that, the government are undertaking an independent review of $120 billion worth of construction pipeline over the next 10 years. So it's hard to say what's going to happen with that space. But it could be a number of things. Exactly what you pointed to, that tends to be the first asset class to kind of sort of come down in a downturn, really. But there is a lot of, mining is still booming. That's still plodding along, and we have a lot of infrastructure that surrounds that. It's just that type of model, that type of asset, we're really starting to see soften more so than others right now.
Yeah, great.
And I'm not including late model, low hour gear in that. Top of the range Caterpillar 2019, 2020 low hour stock is still booming, but it's more the sort of 10-year-old excavators and 10-year-old wheel loaders and things that have kind of gone through quite a hard life that's really beginning to come off. Yeah,
because we know that, a lot of those sort of second-hand assets were, priced not that far from a new asset during,
which is crazy, right?
Absolutely.
To think that plant and equipment appreciates, that's just unheard of. I've never seen that before. And whether we'll see that again, who knows?
Let's hope it's not because of COVID, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Now, that obviously is going to create some challenges then for buyers and sellers.
Yeah.
What are, break those up for me. What are some of the challenges? Obviously, let's start with a buyer. What are the challenges they're facing?
I think, the supply chain for buyers is really affecting them. Their equipment orders are blowing out to 12 months now. And we thought, 2024 or even 2023 that would begin to come back, but it hasn't. And there's still 12-month waits on some, Kenworth trucks, for example, or Caterpillar equipment is still a 12-month wait. So for them, they're really holding on to any assets that they currently have, which is why there's a bit of a problem for remarketers such as ourselves in this space, is getting hold of equipment and packages that we can remarket. These guys are holding on, they're extending the life of their assets. They're going, we can't afford this crazy pricing that the OEMs are coming out with. I think some of the top tier OEMs are hiking their price every month at the moment. So any additional capex, they're going, well, this is not sustainable for us. So we're going to look for other brands that are supplying our markets. And they might not hold their value as well over a period of time, but it's the only option we have to try and sustain this business. So that's been an interesting point of view for buyers, is going, well, where do we really turn when there's a lack of quality equipment coming to the market? And then for sellers, it's the same. They have to restock, they have to replenish their fleet, and they can't. So they're holding on. They're just trying to. I'd imagine there's some operators that have found positives in it. Running their old stock and not reinvesting a load of capex into new equipment, and realizing that their businesses can run quite efficiently with their older stock. And it helps probably navigate some of the tougher times and the cycle behavior of these markets.
Absolutely. And I guess that too then in turn probably increases the expense for a business owner, though, when you're using a lot older equipment. And we've certainly seen some real, we're talking 30, 40-year-old equipment. Obviously there's an increase on expenses of maintenance and repairs, etc. Right? So you have that sort of, you've handled the truck or the excavator that you've had for 7, 8, 9 years, and you're really at that point where it's on its last legs and you need to buy something. You need to buy new because you've run it to its last legs and you can't get your hands on it. So frustrating in that respect, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think certain asset classes like excavators, I don't think there's that much of a problem. There's no shortage of excavators in the Australian market right now. You've just got to log on to Manheim to see the amount that we sell on our civil auction to go, okay, well, that's an asset class that really isn't too much of a problem. Whereas you have an articulated dump truck, which 5 years ago you couldn't give away, now is performing crazy. If we can get our hands on that type of equipment, that's really what we want. But there's some asset classes that there's just no problem whatsoever. There's so many brands that are supplying the excavator market, for example.
Yes.
Whether it's Japanese model, Chinese model, it really doesn't affect them too much in that space. But as you start getting towards the larger stock of equipment, that's when it really, you can really feel the supply chain biting down. You know, we're talking, you know, 40-ton plus pretty much. So that's when it starts really crunching down.
And it's interesting because I was actually going to ask you and say, you know, that talk in the market is that equipment is not necessarily facing the same supply issues.
Yeah.
Which was touched on there. So is that sort of is that a generalised statement, or would that be quite accurate? You know, if you're sort of over that 40-ton mark, you're still in a tough space to get your hands on goods. Like, where does that?
I'd say that's a pretty accurate statement. You know, we have over the years we've had these small independent dealerships prop up, you know, and they go overseas. Their whole business model is built on going overseas, purchasing used stock that fits the criteria for Australia, bringing it in, importing it into Australia and supplying a market. So we've always managed to navigate and competed with new equipment. That's not happening right now. Well, it's happening to some extent, but not nearly as much as the volumes as it was. So you know, new equipment is taking priority on ships coming in. That's what's coming into Australia. Used is taking a step back, and it's getting blown out to these long transit times, and that just naturally is going to have an effect of bringing up asset values. It's just, you know, supply and demand. This is a premium example in that. So yeah, I'd say it's a pretty accurate statement, that for sure.
Yeah, and as a country, obviously we purchase a fair bit of secondhand assets from overseas. We
used to. I'd say that's come off a lot, and I think that's a huge problem right now. Is, you know, when I was starting out off in my career, I was bringing in hundreds of pieces of equipment into Australia, you know, and I was organising all the logistics of that. That's come way off now, and you know, Australia hasn't got an emissions regulation for non-road diesel assets, so you can bring in whatever you like. You could go to Africa and bring in a bulldozer if you wanted to, whereas places like America and the UK, you can't do that. It has to be a certain type of engine to come in there, but they haven't got the same supply chain issues as we do.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So although we've got a greater pool of potential assets we can buy, it's really come off due to this, you know, tightening of regulation around quarantine effectively.
Well, that's a nice segue into what's coming next your way, Jack, and I think you'll have a fair bit of time to chat about this one. But before we do move in, I know that there are going to be a lot of people today on this call who will be very, very keen to ask a lot of questions at the end of this session. We really highly recommend it. So please make sure that you do use the chat function. We are more than happy to address any questions, big, small, indifferent. So please use the chat function, and we'll get some more insights on what's important to you guys at the end of this as well. So big topic. Here we go. I love using the terminology stink bug. But, you know, quarantine, stink bug, government, regulations, you could probably talk about this for half an hour. So, you know, to sort of talk through what is the current, you know, what is the process? You know, for a lot of us, we don't actually know what happens when something new arrives from overseas and what's required. A lot of us probably too are unsure of how tight the government regulations are. So I'm going to hand over to you because I'm really interested in this question. So yeah, give us a rundown on where the big issues are, and also if you see, you know, any ideas for improvement or any ideas on how this is going to get solved.
So to give you an idea of the process involved in supplying, you know, bringing a supply of used equipment to Australia, and we'll pick England as an example. You know, that was a market that I started my career off in. You'd go and purchase a low-hour late model piece of equipment in England. You'd purchase that. You would talk to a financier such as Earlypay, for example, get your trade finance where you'd pay a certain deposit down, and Earlypay would give you 90 days to pay the remainder of that asset. So you've got a 90-day period before you pay anything of this asset. In that time, you've got to clean it, you've got to organize your logistics, you have to book space on a boat, you have to degas it, you have to, we'll have to go on make sure it's sprayed for stink bug if it's in season. Once it's cleaned in the UK in its port of origin, that just means that you can come into the country. That means it can land in that port and it's not going to get turned away. So we know that it's clean enough. Once it gets here, quarantine and cleaning are very different things. If it's spotless in the UK, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to pass quarantine in Australia. So you could end up, let's say a bulldozer, for example, it's going to cost you about £4,000 to £5,000 to clean it in England to the extent that you want it. It's opening up wires, it's cleaning around the nuts and bolts. Once it comes to Australia, you're probably looking at around a $3,000 bill for quarantine. And this is in a good time. This is when we were very, supply chain was kind of working without too many hurdles. Comes into Australia, it gets passed by a quarantine officer after about a week's worth of cleaning, and then it will hop on a truck and it will go to its end user. That's how it should be working. Once it arrives in Australia, you've probably marketed that machine, you'll pay off your finance, and happy days, we're all making money. What's happened recently is the government have become so strict in their biosecurity that where it was common sense to always protect, we live in a country that's very sensitive to any new creatures, and there should always be an emphasis on biosecurity, but it's come to a point now where it's become so difficult to bring anything in that this is what's really impacting our supply chain. So much so that the shipping lines are now going, this is all too hard. We can't run the risk or the gauntlet of having our ships stuck outside of Australia for $250,000 a day, whilst the government decides whether or not we've met the process for stink bug elimination. So they're just going, park the used equipment, bring in the new stuff, bring in the new cars. This can take a back seat for now, and they'll just keep sort of rolling the stock from one ship to the other, and it's roughly about 6 months now to bring a piece of equipment into Australia, which of course blows out your 90-day terms of trade finance. Any investment, if you're looking at a 10% return on a piece of equipment, 6 months that's not a realistic turnaround of funds to have that money out for. So people are walking away from it and saying, that's not worth funding at the moment. And then on top of that, you've got this stink bug issue, which is more costs. I'm hearing in Melbourne now, everything is mandatory tarped when it comes into Australia. So it doesn't matter how clean it is, it's going to get tarped. So there's a cost for that. I think that's about $3,000 to go and wrap a load of plastic wrapping around the machine and have it trucked to the quarantine site for further cleaning.
I wonder where that plastic goes, talking.
Exactly. And this is a country that has no emission standard on their engines. You can bring in whatever you want. It could be puffing out, huge amounts of soot and whatever, and huge diesel emissions. But as long as it's tarped, it's okay. So
wow.
It's quite this is where common sense and regulation is it's really growing apart. I thought back 10 years ago, the efficiencies around quarantine would actually improve, but I've gradually seen them get worse and worse and worse. Back then it was a man in white gloves and, running his finger across your machine, and now it's, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's, I would be interested to know, certainly there's a huge impact on business, right? Who may need a particular machine or a particular piece of equipment from overseas to get the job done. But I imagine that there would be quite an impact on medical equipment in this as well.
I don't know too much about medical equipment. I'd imagine that you'd think that they'd bring that in as a priority, compared to a bulldozer. It's probably, a much more serious. Sure. I wouldn't know whether or not that faces the same challenges. I assume not, because it would all be new equipment coming in. We wouldn't have these used issues that we have. They haven't necessarily been parked in a field with loads of rats and everything climbing all over them like they would a piece of equipment. But yeah, I'd imagine that would be that would get in the headlines pretty quick if they were stopping that type of equipment coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned before about the, that was a terminology I looked up after our chat the other day, which was, your RoRo, which is your roll on, roll off, shipping containers. So I learned something. So thank you. But, you mentioned that, some of them are just not wanting to even, ship out here because of the cost. Is that actually true? Like, is it it's obviously a huge cost to get these containers out here, and then when they're sitting idle out at sea, are we seeing less people in the space or more?
Yeah, well, the RoRo carriers, that was the cheapest way to get heavy used stock into Australia was RoRo carriers. So you'd bring it in, it would drive onto the ship, they'd lash it down, and it'd come off. 5 years ago, if someone suggested that you were to move a 40-ton articulated dump truck on a flat rack, you'd kind of get laughed at because of the comparison. It was so ludicrous to even assume that that's a solution. Whereas now, that's all you really can do. The container lines are, they're loving life because you're effectively paying for 5 slots on a container ship. So you're not paying for the one Arctic, you're paying for 5 places where that extends. So you're paying for 5 containers. So they're saying, give us more. And the RoRo carriers are going, no, we don't want this. And a prime example, is in Japan. They've stopped bringing used equipment out of there for the foreseeable future. So it's all just parked up in the yard in Japan and going, we're not bringing this out. We can't run the risk with this coming into Australia and us paying $250,000 a day to bring in 1 piece of equipment, 2 pieces of equipment, 3 pieces of equipment, whatever it is. Let's prioritize the cars and we'll just keep rolling that stock. So the only option is containers, and that is a quicker alternative to come in. I don't know why the government are probably more accepting of it coming in on a container over RoRo. I'm not too sure why, but common sense out the window. I gave up long ago trying to guess what their processes are and how they decipher whether or not a container is a more feasible way to skip biosecurity. I'm not sure.
It's it's interesting because obviously that's got a huge impact on importers, right?
Yeah, massively. I'd say for independent importers, I'd say it's quite crippling right now for them. I'd imagine there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of pain. They're having to overpay for equipment, or they're having to overpay for equipment here in Australia, and you see that playing out in these asset prices right now. Instead of being able to go overseas for a quality piece of used equipment, they're really looking domestically and paying over the odds for it, just for the flexibility that it's here right now.
Yeah. So. And it's interesting, because I think, that, and that's not just around equipment, right? That's importers of anything. That's affecting, a whole industry, regardless of what you're importing. The costs, the regulation, the quarantine, all of those things seem to have, swelled to this sort of, as you said, not so common sense approach. And so we've got all these guys off the back of 2 years of, COVID restrictions in that respect, travel, people not spending. And, I wonder too, when you have a look at that, inflation, not being able to get your hands on bigger things, is that why we're spending more money? It seems to all be connected. And again, you're right, there seems to be this typical, which we see quite often in politics and in government, is this, their pattern that they're taking, or the path that they've taken, versus the rest of the country, who seems to think that you're missing the common sense part of and it seems to be a lot of people. So it always missed me how they miss that.
I guess the government are going, this used civil equipment or used plant and equipment coming in is probably pretty low on our priority. Yes, it's crippling some people, but it's probably pretty low on their agenda to try and fix. I'd imagine. I'd assume that there's someone there that deals with it, but I don't think it's too much of an issue yet for them that they need change.
And Jack, it's not something obviously that you guys specialize in, but I know that you're certainly across it. What is the effect on then if a lot of people are wanting to do new cars, etc. Are happy to import, but they much prefer to have new vehicles coming in than secondhand. What in your view is causing the issues with this, supply chain issues with passenger cars? I could probably reel off 4 or 5 mates who are continually getting an email that say we still don't have a build date yet. And they're 6 months in. What's sort of the effect of what's causing that?
I think that's all down to, I guess it's this perfect storm of what's happening across the planet, right? With all the, war in Ukraine, commodities are just sort of taking, it's just harder to do business these days, and I think I'd imagine it's a number of reasons, but predominantly it's this supply chain. It's not been able to get on the ships quick enough. It's going, well, we did have that period of lockdown where orders just took a backstop, and they're probably catching up. I don't know what impact that has on such a large corporation such as a BMW or a Jaguar Land Rover, or how long does that actually take to get those orders back? I still see Toyota Land Cruisers with a 12-month wait, whereas a friend of mine managed to get one pretty quick the other day because the finance fell through on it. So it's on another client. So
yeah,
who knows? I've stopped sort of listening to what they tell us. It's the same with inflation. You're told a certain narrative of what's going on, but whether or not that's accurate, who knows? I think for all of us here, we just see our bank accounts dwindling and going, oh crap, this is actually hitting us.
Yeah.
But who knows what's actually happening? I would have thought 2024, 2025, you'd hope that it would catch up, but yeah.
And I don't think anyone really perceived what was going to happen, with the closure of all the Australian, manufacturing plants and stuff that we had, especially in South Australia.
Yeah, for sure.
Vehicles are concerned. I don't think anyone predicted, the boom especially in Australia over the last few years, and the work that could have come out of those organisations. I
think particularly with the boom in commodities, that's reflective when we see agriculture for us right now is far exceeding expectations. It's a really buoyant part of our business, and you see that probably with what's happening in Ukraine. Our beef, our exports, our commodities, the wool, other meat is all soaring right now because the demand for Australian produce is just that much more in demand. So we see naturally that's going to have an impact on the asset value surrounding that type of commodity. It's the same in mining. During COVID, coal got to $430 a ton. That is unheard of. That was that's a money factory, and during the downturn, it was $65 a ton. So there's a real, that's a real spike in value. It's somewhat evened off now. I'd argue it's still relatively high, around 140 a ton, but it's that gives you an idea of the commodity spike that surrounds all our asset classes.
And also, I think that massive fluctuation, as you said, normally sits around 65, gets up to 430, sort of.
Yeah.
Now at 140, they're big fluctuations. They're not small things that we're seeing in the market.
No.
I'm really interested to get sort of your predictions on what you see for this particular, so we're talking about, trucks, machinery, equipment, the whole realm that we would see in this commercial space. What are some of your predictions for supply chain around that?
Everything looks and everything is sounding like we should have a bit of a downturn, and these prices should come way off and demand should come off. I think when you rise interest rates, the cost of everything's more expensive, labor's more expensive, labor's harder to find, and with them opening the doors now to immigration, and there's kind of a flood coming in, and you'd think it would cool off. My predictions are that it would cool off. However, I've been wrong about this before, peering into the future, and it could well take another 2 years before it does that, and we still see continued crazy prices in some asset classes. I think civil and construction, I do think will come off quite drastically by the end of the year. But for the others, agriculture and transport and mining, I still see that as there's no, I don't see that there being a shortage or a decline in that particular space and those industries towards the end of the year. So, it's probably much the same as it is right now, towards the end of the year. I think 6 months away, like it's just, not too far. But yeah, I'd say it's going to stay pretty consistent to what we're seeing right now, despite all the indicators suggesting that it wouldn't.
Yes, well, you and I, we can estimate and guesstimate as much as we like. I feel like we're all waiting on the guesstimate today, right? Are they going to hike rates, or are they not going to hike rates?
Yeah.
So,
I think
half the economists are saying yes and half are saying no.
Yeah, so, I think for Earlypay, particularly when you talk about getting into, reintroducing yourselves into the equipment finance space, when you're taking 3 to 5 year positions on some of this equipment, that's now, that's a long period of time to see such fluctuation in your asset classes. So when you're underwriting your residuals, you really got to understand a long-term average, as opposed to going, oh, well, we know that articulated dump truck's going gangbusters at the moment, so we can write a pretty high residual. We know we're going to be okay in this, loaning on this type of equipment. But whether or not that's the case in 3 years, which, who knows? So I think financiers have got a bit of a sticky road ahead of them to understand, what their risk is.
And it's funny because that was sort of going to be my next question. And I guess, for us taking, that time to watch the market, play with the market, make sure that you've got all your right, funding lines, etc., in place for exactly what you're talking about is gold, because a lot of financiers are, I guess, of what we would say have enjoyed the boom as well. But you're right, where do rates sit? Where does the value of that asset sit?
Yeah.
In 2-3 years' time. And look, no one writes a deal hoping it's going to fall over, right? But for the ones that do, would see some really different, which is where you guys come in, obviously, but you can see something valued very, very differently that you lend against 18 months ago to today, depending again on your asset class, you're right, but you can see some, massive changes in those valuations. And are you guys seeing that from a piece of equipment that you looked at 2 years ago versus today? That's where you're seeing some of the things start to pull off. You're seeing that already.
Yeah. We I think all valuers would probably agree to take a relatively conservative approach, and it depends in what scenario you're valuing. It might be something that's going fire sale, liquidation, insolvency tomorrow, or it could be something, give me an estimate of what this is worth in 5 years. It really depends, but I do think if it's a 3 to 5 year loan, we would probably be quite a conservative value. We'd understand that the average moves quite regularly, and it's not, we can't say that these high asset prices are going to be around for the foreseeable future, but something that is old, that hasn't had maintenance, the values going to come off. People can't afford, or get finance for that type of asset now. So
absolutely.
it goes fire sale for cash buyers.
That's that's really interesting. What for our brokers that are listening today, and then obviously I'm going to spin that question for any of our clients that are on board. But for brokers today, what sort of thing are they going to be talking to their clients about, or they are going to see come across their desk, where they're going to think, oh, I should pick up the phone and chat to the guys at Manheim, or I should pick up the phone and chat to Jack about that? Where do you guys fit into a broker's life and, their client satisfaction and really looking after their client, whether it's a good, bad or indifferent scenario, but to explain that to them?
I think where we're a good partner for brokers in particular. If it's a business broker, we really understand an asset-rich company that's going for sale, so we can really unplug what that underlying value is. That's not to say what that company's worth. There's always more on top, but as an asset in a downturn, what is that company? How's that going to perform? What's that going to look like? That's where we can really unlock value for brokers. Finance brokers, similar. You know, we do understand residual. We understand, you know, we've got the data behind us to really predict what's, you know, as best as we can, what it's going to look like in a few years. You know, try and, if we can, do what's best for their client in getting what they want, but also trying to be as objective as you can in a very subjective niche that is valuation. You know, it's just trying to assist them when they might not necessarily understand the equipment that they're loaning against. You know, for example, underground mining equipment has a you know, if it's not well maintained, has a much smaller residual than surface mining, and making sure that they're aware of that when they're going into conversations with their clients. And of course, a discussion around, you know, whether their clients want to retire and sell down the business, but not sell it off as a business or a going concern, but they just want to retire, want to put their feet up, and they realize now that they want to, you know, take advantage of this asset. Boom, what's it still happening?
Great. And so that also obviously fits into the client. So the brokers may have a client like that who's just looking to wind up, close down.
Yeah.
But then you've obviously got those clients who may find themselves in, you know, needing to offload, whether that's, you know, downsizing a particular part of their business and not needing that, you know, that particular set of equipment. You know, what are some of the things that you would be dealing direct to client with that you see at the moment?
I think there's a real piece around this ATO side. I think for a lot of finance brokers, if they're trying to get a deal over the line, and say if there's a certain fleet or they're trying to get equipment passed, but there's a big ATO debt that's hovering over their client that's stopping them getting this, you know, to the next stage. Talk to us about can you restructure this? Can we sell off some of these assets? What are these worth? So we can try and get this ATO debt down so we can keep this customer going. You know, I think that where they've had a period where they haven't really had to take too much notice of ATO, that's suddenly cracking down on them now. So talk to us if they've got assets in their business. Let us see what we can do for them to try and reduce that debt and try and, you know, help them restructure their business where they can. You know, you might be pleasantly surprised as to what this equipment's worth to someone, you know, but you don't know if you don't ask.
Ask the question. Yeah, you're right. And we are saying, you know, and certainly as you're aware, that's the space we're in, but, you know, capital raises and really being able to raise that capital that you need, you know, strong business, good assets, just recovering off the back of a tough time.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes to sort of land with that short-term loan is really just sort of hamstringing their cash flow. Yeah. And it certainly fits for some clients, don't get me wrong, but if things are a bit tight, you know, being able to get your assets valued and then look at a capital raise, which is obviously then over a longer term, less stress on the payments, you know, that's something that we've always done quite well and something that we've brought back with our EF offering. So I think that's really important to know as well. I have got a question from someone in the chat. So they probably just missed the start because we did start right on time due to Donelle's technical difficulties this morning. But do you guys play in the passenger car space?
Yeah, we do. We got a big PCB space. You know, Manheim, to be honest, the business was built on that. You know, they've got a huge car business all across Australia, all across the world, America. That's really softened. It's got a lot of. I'm not an expert in passenger vehicles, but from the company point of view, there is a lot of hurdles that they're trying to get through, and they're trying to make sure that it's sustainable. But Manheim predominantly is huge in that space. You know, it's a real pillar of our business is the passenger vehicle side of things, for sure.
Yeah, and I just wanted to touch on it, obviously, because, you know, for most of us that are watching and are on this webinar today, we're the ones driving the passenger vehicles, right? So that does affect us, which is really interesting. Any big tips that you would hand out to, you know, the broker network?
I'd say just reach out. I think that's, even if it's just a discussion, it's not something we bill hourly for. Even if you just want a chat and you've got a problem that you just want voice to us. We've got valuers in our company with a lot of experience and a lot of time spent in the industry, and they can give you some real non-biased advice moving forward, and who you need to talk to, and what's the best way to approach this. If you're struggling to get finance approved, talk to us. And I think that's probably it. Reach out, particularly in this period of time where the economic landscape is changing so much. Reach out to us. We have all the data. We can help you steer where you need to go with your clients in particular.
Yeah, perfect. And I guess from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges? And actually, this will probably be the last question. So if anyone's got anything they want to put in the chat or the Q&A section now would be, a great time. But first of all, I'll just recap what you said there. And that's one of the things we like about, obviously you work with lots of financiers. We work with, a handful of valuers because, you're all across the country and, at different times you need different things. But I think for us, that's one of the things, and I can certainly attest to that, is a very similar alignment of organisational values about giving. So it's not about the take, it's all about the give and the care. And I think that that's really important, and something that, we've always felt when we've dealt with you, is that true authenticity about actually wanting to give back. And I think that's really nice, that can shine through.
Course.
Here we go. I will go to the crowd first. Cam said, does new and used equipment go through similar security when importing to Oz, or is there more security around used equipment?
Yeah, no, vastly different. New will come sailing through, no problem at all. There is it's a term that we've used over the years. Unused is a different term to new, and that will take a little bit of scrutiny. It never used to. An unused piece of equipment, and that could be a 1 hour on the clock, is now coming under the same sort of spotlight as used.
Really?
That's what's changed. Yeah. So we used to call it grey iron, which is not quite new, but it's technically a certain age or whatever. But new, fundamentally, the OEMs, Caterpillar, Komatsu, Hitachi, straight through, no problems at all. No headaches. Your risk is a lot lower. Used is running the gauntlet effectively right now. We're going, let's roll the dice and see what we get. It's either going to ruin a small business or it's going to go okay. So
yeah, and I think that's the key, right? Is then the supply chain. So yes, you can get things quicker that are new.
Yeah,
but they're still a lot longer than they ever used to be.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
And so then you've got, whether you're looking at a bridging finance solution or, there's a lot of people, including us, we're only playing with trade if you've got a debtor facility. You know what I mean? So that's real standalone trade is only available with a few financiers as well at the moment. So right, you're running the gauntlet either way, I guess. That it's going to take time if you're buying unused or used. A new terminology now. That's going to take time. But then you really need to make sure that you've got your finance, your planning, all in place, because if you think you can hold something for 90 days and get here, it's not going to happen.
No. And we work with experts in this field. We work, whether it's logistics firms or, there's a real network around equipment here in Australia that these people really know what they're doing. And at the moment, it's every day is a new day with regulation and changes, and suddenly you've bought something overseas and they've decided they don't want to bring it in anymore. That's out of your control. So you have to offload it there and deal with all those problems pretty much.
All right, well, we'll just give people a couple of minutes to type out their questions while I ask you this last one, from my side.
Yep.
Manheim, moving into this financial year, what are some of the challenges that you see for your business in the space that you work in?
That's a good question. I'd say finding stock to sell. You know, we do want more. You know, we want to remarket equipment when we can. I think until these supply chains sort themselves out a bit, you know, we're affected by that as well. You know, people replenishing stock. You know, you know, we really need that cycle to get moving, particularly in the construction space. You know, I'm not talking necessarily about agriculture and transport. You know, that's quite it's doing quite well for us in that civil and construction space. You know, we really need to see more stock coming in, to be honest, and our sales need to keep moving. Whether or not the prices go up or down, you know, things sell. That, you know, that's the nature of our business, but it is making sure the volume of sales picks up. And I think as long as there's these supply chains, that's a big hurdle that we face in that particular industry, for sure.
Fantastic. Well, Jack, I think we've covered some pretty good topics today, actually.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
And we haven't got any more questions. We'll just we'll close out and see if anything popped through. But yes, which they did. So does Manheim work with one-man broker? The one-man broker?
Yeah, for sure, of course.
Yep.
Yeah. Reach out. You know, if you know, you still need. It doesn't matter who you're dealing with, or you know, or the size of the company. We'll work with big corporates, or we'll work with Joe Bloggs that has started a demolition business and, you know, wants to sell his one excavator or one truck that he's been with for 10 years, or we value one piece of equipment, or we'll value a whole fleet.
Yeah, so sure.
Yeah, no problem whatsoever.
Fantastic. And Peter, absolutely. As soon as this webinar's over, everyone that attended today will receive all of Jack's details. So Peter just reached out and wanted to know how he gets in contact. So
perfect.
That'll come out in your email today.
Awesome.
So yeah, that'll have Jack's home address, you know, personal mobile. But you'll get his mobile and email at the end of this webinar. I'll just say, no, that was just a thank you from Peter. So Jack, it's always a pleasure. You know, we have the joy of being in Queensland and probably, you know, get to see you guys a little bit. But it's always a pleasure chatting. It's always a pleasure getting your insights. Yeah, and we're getting some great feedback now, just saying super informative, and everyone really appreciates your time. So thank you so much for joining us for the Earlypay Partnership Series. And we'll look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dave. Bye.